Today is Tuesday. It's Chof Daled Tammuz Tavshin Gimel, and we are in Teres Menachem Sefer Mamar Tavshin Yud Aleph Tavshin Yud Beis. In the first Mamar of Tavshin Yud Beis, Kevod Malchuscha, second day of Rosh Hashanah. We'll start again from Kufim Gimel at the bottom, chapter 2 at the beginning. Just to come up to speed to where we're up to, and to pick up the thread. Kevod Malchuscha, they will speak the honor of your kingdom, of Malchus. So we're talking about Sphiras HaMalchus, the divine attribute of Malchus, the last of the 10 Sphiras. And the Rebbe explained, bringing from the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, that Malchus needs to be built, Binyan HaMalchus. It needs to be constructed in order to be a full-fledged Sphira, a full-fledged attribute, meaning it should contain also all the other 9, to be a complete part of a complete profile, so that it could be active as the implementer and manager of creation on behalf of Hashem. It's constructed mainly through Gvuris, as I explained in the first Shiur many weeks ago, that when we talk about the attribute of Chesed and the attribute of Gvura above, it says in Kabbalah that each one of them contains 5 aspects. There are 5 aspects to Chesed and 5 aspects to Gvura. Gvura, strictness, is the idea of withholding or regulating. Chesed is the idea of giving, transmitting. Without Gvura, in other words, if Malchus would be constructed not through Gvura but rather through Chesed, what would have happened is there would have been creation, there would have been worlds, but as creation and as worlds, they would be completely bottled, completely submissive and nullified before Hashem. They would not be seen as obvious, separate entities. And therefore, Hashem's intended purpose in creation, that there should be an existence that appears and is outside and separate of Hashem. And there, His presence should become manifest, and they should become submissive and bottled and nullified before Hashem. That would not be able to be carried out. Because even as created beings, it would be obvious that they are an extension, as it were, of Hashem, and therefore bottled, therefore nullified, and therefore the whole purpose of creation would not be able to be carried out.
This is happening above or within or below Malchus?
Below Malchus. After below Malchus, the Atzilus. Malchus of Atzilus.
Is this the deal between Malchus and Keser?
No, we're talking hypothetically. Had Malchus been constructed through Chesed rather than through Gvura, the point the Alter Rebbe is making is that Malchus needs to be constructed through Gvura rather than through Chesed. Why? Because Chesed means infusing Malchus with a divine energy which is obviously and always connected to Hashem.
So all the other...
So anything that would follow from Malchus, would have the same characteristic. You would have Bria Yitzir Asiyah, but not in the form as we know it. You would have Bria Yitzir Asiyah that are nullified before Hashem. You would look at Gashmias of the world, you would see trees, but you wouldn't see, now when you look at a tree, it looks like a separate entity. You would see the Dvar Hashem, the divine energy that sustains it.
So everything above is created from the Far Chasadim.
When you say above
So
what?
above, say, Malchus...
It's not created, you're talking about Ne'etzalim, they're emanations. Atzilus is bottled, yes. Atzilus is bottled before Hashem. Bria, the first creature, as it were, exists in Bria. Malachim, the highest Malachim you'll find in Bria. Atzilus is still Etzle V'Sambuch. It's just a revelation of Hashem. It's Sphiris, but as they are completely bottled before Hashem.
Where does the 5 Gevuras, where do they emanate from and where do they...
In Atzilus, we're talking about the 5 Gvuras.
Right. And why 5 or 1 or 7?
Let's leave that for the moment. Because I guess because the main midas are 5, it's really not important, but let's take it as read. There are 5 Chesodim and 5 Gvuras. The idea being, let's call it as a catch-all, Chesed and Gvura. If Malchus would be constructed from Chesed, then the divine energy that it would transmit would be one which would continue that same characteristic of what? Being an extension of Hashem, and therefore bottle from the outset, it would be nullified. And therefore, the purpose of creation would not be able to be carried out. Because the purpose of creation is to have a yesh and a metzias, something that is separate of Hashem, and that separate entity becomes nullified before Hashem through avodah, through a yid serving Hashem, and so on and so forth. He reveals within it that really and truly, it too is what is an extension, as it were, of Hashem. And not only that, over there you can reveal the very essence of Hashem. Because only the very essence of Hashem, who is the true yesh, the true being, could create a creature that appears to be a yesh, as it were. And nevertheless, we reveal within it its bittul. So bottom line is, we need to create a being that has two opposing characteristics. On the one hand, it appears as a yesh. On the other hand, it has to lend itself to become bottled, to become nullified before Hashem. How do we bring about such a being? So he explained, that is through building, constructing Malchus, which is as I said, the manager and the implementer of creation, right? Hashem implements and manages creation through Malchus. So Malchus is constructed through Gvura, which means it withholds the divine energy. It regulates the divine energy that comes into Malchus. What does it do? It's sort of, just like when we talk about Tzimtzum, the removal of the divine energy created, notionally, a space, so to speak, where there is no Ein Sof. And therefore, when the Ein Sof then comes back down, it comes into a new reality where it now says, hey, there's a possibility for there to be existence, as it were, which appears to be outside Ein Sof. Of course, that is also a godly force, a withholding force, a concealing force. But it appears to be as if there is no Ein Sof there, and therefore when the divine energy that is the revealing force, the Kav, when it comes back into the Tzimtzum, it reckons with the new reality that it has to illuminate a place that now is devoid of Ein Sof. Similarly, when we talk about Malchus being constructed through Gvura, it means it draws down a divine energy which says there is the possibility for something to exist, and it should not have the characteristic of bittul before Hashem. That's the idea of constructing Malchus through Gvura. At the same time, we need to we don't want it to mutate completely into a being where it is completely separate of Hashem, and doesn't have even the potential to become bittul before Hashem, become nullified. So therefore it has to be sweetened with chesed. So it's Gvura sweetened by chesed, which constructs Malchus. Therefore, you get a being, you get an existence, you get a creature that what? That on one hand is a yesh, on the other hand lends itself, through working with it, to become battle and nullified before Hashem.
Up to now, you've been saying Malchus is created, Gevura,
Is constructed.
by Hashem.
Correct.
And now you're introducing
Chesed.
again Chesed.
Correct.
What's the balance? Why?
I just explained. Because if it would be constructed only from chesed, then the divine energy that goes through Malchus, you would not have nivroim, you wouldn't have creatures that are a yesh. You would have creatures that are bottle, nullified.
Yesh, you mean existence.
No, I don't mean existence. I mean a being that appears to be separate of Hashem. It's a yesh, it's got its own identity. If we look at...
How can anything be independent of Hashem?
It's the illusion of independence.
It's not illusion. It's not illusion. From the perspective of the nivra, from the perspective of the creature genuinely feels itself, its consciousness, as a separate entity. If it would be an illusion, then the whole purpose of Torah mitzvahs would not...
You and I feel ourselves
Correct.
independent.
Correct. Or when you look at the world around us, it doesn't strike you immediately that it's an extension of Hashem. You know, when you do
This is the illusion.
it's not an illusion.
That we feel ourselves independent.
It's our perspective. Yeah. Hashem's perspective is Einod Milvadei. Our perspective is that there is a world, and that perspective, even though it's only our perspective, is a true perspective. I mean, this is a long discussion in Chassidus when we talk about taking water and putting it into a clear glass. It appears clear. Then you take water and you put it into a red glass. It appears red, or in a green glass. It'll appear green. That appearance is an illusion? No. The water lends itself through being put into a glass, which causes the water to appear in a certain way. That appearance is real. In other words, it has in it two characteristics. It has in it the characteristic as it is for itself, and then it has in it the characteristic as it projects itself to others. That projection to others is real. It's only the projection, but it's not an illusion. Similarly, when we talk about Oir, right? Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, whatever it might be. The Oir itself, this is a discussion among the Mekabalim, but let's go along this line. The Oir itself is neutral. What causes this Oir to be Chesed, and this Oir to be Gvura, and this Oir to be Tiferes? Mainly the Keli. The Keli is the one that imposes the character onto the Oir. So is it real? You could say it's not really Chesed, it's not really Gvura, because if you take the Oir out of the Kli, if you separate them, the Oir is neutral. No, but because why? Because the Oir has in it a characteristic that lends itself to be projected in a certain way. That projection is real. So from our perspective, looking from down up, it's Chesed and it's Gvura. And it's real. Real to what extent? In its projection. But it's not an illusion. If it would be an illusion, that the whole point of Torah mitzvahs, the whole point of reward and punishment, the whole point of all these consequences, the Yechudim, they would all be meaningless. Right? So it is real. This goes back to the original Ein Sof, where you have, before the Tzimtzum, you have Hashem, the Moir, the essence of Hashem, then you have Oir, and in Oir you have the three aspects, the Gila Oir HaShayach La'atzmei, you have the Oir as it's included in Hashem, then you have the revelation of Oir as it is from its perspective, and then you have the revelation of Oir as it relates to the other. That is a dimension in Oir. And from that aspect of Oir as it relates to the other, you eventually get these characteristics in Oir where it allows itself to be projected in a certain way. And that projection, the way it projects itself, is real, so far as the ones that are below are concerned. Okay? So therefore, going back to Malchus, Malchus needs to be constructed from Gvura, because otherwise you would have. Let me tell you another point. There was a chassid, his name was Reb Shmuel Greinem Esterman. He was one of the biggest mashpiyim in Lubavitch, and so on and so forth. There's a maimer of the Rebbe Rashab, a famous hemshech called Ha'umnam, or Ner Chanuk. It's 3 Mamorim in Tov Reish Mem Gimel. In this maimer Ha'umnam, the Rebbe Rashab talks about Bittul Ha'ilmus. The world has its nullified before Hashem. I think it was Greinem that said, Reb Shmuel Greinem Esterman said, that if you learn this maimer long enough, if you revise it enough times, and you contemplate for 10 minutes a day this maimer, or however long a day, if you contemplate this maimer, his abundance, before davening or during davening, before davening, this maimer long enough, when you will walk in the street, you will look at the tree, you won't see the tree, you'll see the Dvar Hashem, the God, the divine energy that sustains the tree. The Alter Rebbe, before he passed away, on Motzei Shabbos, when he looked at the beam, I believe it was in the rafters, in the rafter in the ceiling, and he said, I don't see the piece of wood, I see the Dvar Hashem that sustains the piece of wood. Right? So it's a perspective. That is a perspective that you reach when you're at a very high level. Right? The normal way, when we look at the tree, you don't see the Dvar Hashem, you see the tree. And that's a real identity, right? That's real, that perspective is real. It's through Avodah, through Avodas Hashem, through serving Hashem, through davening, through learning, through the performance of mitzvahs, that we reveal within the world the Dvar Hashem, what's going to be when Mashiach comes. The world is going to be different, we're going to live in a spiritual world. No. But when we will walk in the streets, we will see how everything is in fact what? We will see the Dvar Hashem that sustains it. The divine energy that sustains the world. That will be predominant. When we say that that the life of a tzaddik is not a life of flesh and blood. What does it mean it's not a life of flesh and blood? A tzaddik is born by a mother and a father. He eats and sleeps, maybe not as much as other people, but certainly needs to eat and sleep in order to sustain himself. So what do you mean his life, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, is not a life of flesh, but rather Yiras Hashem, Avas Hashem, and Emunas Hashem, fear of God, love of God, and belief in God? What does that mean? It means that the tzaddik's frame of reality is God. The physical aspect of his life is an addition. In other words, for us, what comes instinctively and naturally is the gashmias, and we need to reveal the godliness, the kedusha and the ruchnias. For a tzaddik, it's the other way around. A tzaddik's way of life is, in other words, are we physical beings having a spiritual experience, or are we spiritual beings having a physical experience? Are you with me? So similarly, when we look at the world, the perspective of the world as a physical entity and everything in it as physical yesh, that has its own identity and appears to be separate of Hashem and independent of Hashem, that's real. That perspective is real.
So you're saying when someone says, I'm having a spiritual moment, really they're having a physical moment?
Well, yeah, to an extent.
We're having physical moments, we're not having spiritual.
We're not having physical moments. It's one big physicality. It's not a
the
moment.
opposite.
It's not a moment. It's just physical. Moments of sanity or insanity. We won't get into that. We're going into dangerous territory right
Please,
now.
yes.
Yeah. But the point is, if Malchus would be constructed, Binyan Malchus would be through Chesed, you would look at the world and you would see the world as it would appear as it will appear when Mashiach comes. You would have a physical world, but you would see the Dvar Hashem. That would be the reality. The fact that it's a physical entity, okay. So God reveals Himself in spirituality, and God reveals Himself in physicality. So you need to create a world that has an identity, an independent identity. That's what I mean when I say yesh, a yesh and a metzias, right? And at the same time lends itself, doesn't mutate into being completely independent, but it lends itself to become bottled and nullified before Hashem through avodas Hashem, through serving Hashem, Torah mitzvahs, and so on and so forth. Therefore, you construct Malchus through Gvura, and you pepper it, as it were, you sweeten it with Chesed. Because Chesed is the idea that causes the bittul before Hashem. That's the connection, the connection that in an obvious sense should also be connected to Hashem. So predominantly it's constructed through Gvura. But in order for it to also have the potential to become bottled before Hashem, it's sweetened with Chesed. That's the point. Okay? Now, how did this work? That's what Alter Rebbe starts explaining. The Rebbe starts explaining in chapter 2. The Zohar says, "V'hine bereishu menusa de malka golif v'chulu." This is an expression this is the opening statement of the entire Zohar. Bereishu menusa de malka, in the beginning of the revelation of the king's desire. When Hashem decided to create the world, golif glifu b'tehiru ilah, Hashem engraved an engraving in the celestial purity, meaning He caused a tzimtzum in the Ein Sof. This is the idea of tzimtzum, removing. When you engrave, when you engrave something, when you carve out something in a rock, you're removing of the stone. So Golif Glifu means He removed His Ein Sof. What does it mean? All of it, we'll start again from Kufim Gimel at the bottom. Chapter 2 at the beginning. It rose up in His pure desire, in a simple desire, that He wanted to have a dwelling place in the lowest realms. Meaning to say that when Hashem created the world, all of this energy, divine energy, and the tzimtzum, and the Ein Sof, and so on and so forth, that took place on Hashem's initiative, because there was nobody yet in existence to cause Hashem to draw it out of Hashem. So it had to be His initiative. He had to do it all. However, after creation, all this needs to take place through the lifting of the female waters, which is another way of saying through the initiative of the ones below, from the receivers. The male is the giver, the female is the receiver. The anatomy is that way because spiritually it is that way, right? So who is the female? It's the creatures, the creations, Hashem's creations, us, right? So from that point on, we have to cause Hashem to awaken a desire within Hashem to want to continue to bestow His divine energy onto the world, so that it could continue to exist. How do we do that? We need to cause Hashem to have pleasure from the nullification of His creatures, of created beings, before Him. However, but Hashem's creatures are all considered as naught before Him. What's the relationship between us and Hashem? We're massively distant. We're so distant from Hashem, in fact, that Hashem is way, way beyond us. We can't even begin to contemplate that anything that we do should be meaningful before Him, and that we can awaken Him to have pleasure from what we do. So therefore, how is it possible for Hashem to receive pleasure from created beings? We are, the parable for our relationship to Hashem is like a fly that flies around in the house relative to the humans that inhabit that house. And in fact, in another mimer of the Alter Rebbe says that the distance between us and Hashem is even greater than the distance between the fly and the human. Right? And all of creation came into being through these multitude and a great number of contractions through the order of descent, through Hishtalshalos. And by the time we end up to have, in our realm, the distance, the gap between us and Hashem is quantum. There is no relationship between us and Hashem. So how do we cause Hashem to have pleasure? So he says, therefore, there needs to be the awakening from below to draw out this level of pleasure of Hashem. For that itself. In other words, we have to, as it were, almost create a pleasure within Hashem, that relationship, so that what we do should be meaningful enough for Hashem, so that He has the pleasure from the fact that we serve Him. And where does this level of pleasure come from? Os tisanag al Hashem. You know, we say in Kiddush on Shabbos day, it's a quote I believe from Yeshaya, is it? Yeah, from Yeshaya. If you withhold your feet from engaging in mundane activities on Shabbos, Pasuk elaborates, he gives all the rewards that's going to have. That I will make you ride on the high places of the earth. In other words, Hashem talks about the rewards that He gives you for keeping Shabbos, and then He says, "Os tis anag al Hashem," and then you will have pleasure from Hashem. But the phrase that the pasuk uses is "Os tis anag al Hashem." Al Hashem means on Hashem, upon Hashem, in a certain sense, meaning beyond Hashem. What does that mean? There is Yud Kei Vav Kei, Hashem. And then there is the levels of godliness which are beyond Yud Kei Vav Kei. Os tis anag al Hashem, it means that we have to tap in to create this level of tainug, to bring about this level of pleasure within Hashem, that He should gain pleasure from our actions, means we have to reach a level which is beyond Yud Kei Vav Kei. In other words, we have to go very, very high indeed. And he's going to explain, of course, that mainly this takes place on Rosh Hashanah. And through what we do on Rosh Hashanah, we actually tap into these very high levels and bring it down and make that connection between Hashem and creation. V'hinei. B'Rosh Hashanah, on Rosh Hashanah, Zeh Hayom Tchilas Ma'asecha. It says, as we say in davening, Rosh Hashanah, this day is the beginning of your deeds. What does it mean? This day is the beginning of your deeds. Not only do we commemorate creation which took place thousands and thousands of years ago, so many years ago, but in fact, on Rosh Hashanah, the process of creation starts anew. What does it mean? Asher chayzer hadavar lekadmusay. Everything reverts back to its original state. What does it mean it reverts back to its original state? It reverts back to its original state almost as if we have to start the process of creation all over again. It's not almost as if, it is in fact that way. The only difference being that on Rosh Hashanah, we know that before Rosh Hashanah the world existed. And the world does continue to exist even while this process goes on. And soon we'll see how the world continues to exist. But in fact, what actually happens each and every Rosh Hashanah, the whole process of creation, going back to when? To Bereshis, to Genesis, has to start all over again. In all the levels, going all the way back to the Eines of Shalif, that Tzimtzum, and so on and so forth, to the very, very highest levels. So therefore, Tzarech Lahamshich Kanal. So on Rosh Hashanah, we have to draw down all this again. So in other words, the point is this. At the first moment of creation, when God created the world, Bereshis Bara Elokim, the first time, it was Hashem's initiative to create the world. From that time and on, when the time of creation comes again, which means every single Rosh Hashanah, Hashem doesn't do it on His own initiative anymore. Now it's up to us. We have to cause the process of creation to start again. That's the point of this whole thing, of this whole long discussion. That's what we have to actually do on Rosh Hashanah. V'zeu imru lefanei malchus. What do we on Rosh Hashanah? One of the things we do is we say imru lefanei malchus. We have to say verses of malchus, of kingdom, and that draws down through Torah. We draw down Hashem's kingdom onto the world. But imru means not only say, but also kimei v'havaya ha'emircha hayem. There's a pasuk in Pashas Kisaveh which says, and God has, as it were, selected you today. Ha'emircha is also from the expression of hisparus, lashon hisparus, praising, being proud. Hashem today has caused Himself to be proud with you. What does that mean? So Imru could also mean from the expression of what? Of holding precious or lifting something. For example, gives a metaphor of if one brings an object before the king, a beautiful object, and you praise this object before the king, in order to draw down into the king that he should have pleasure from this object. Continue Mitzvah tomorrow.